Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day, and I actually went to my LCS, my local comic shop, because I checked the lists ahead of time online, and there were two individual floppy issues of storylines, current storylines that I am reading with interest, maybe a little guarded optimism. It used to be, once upon a time, for many decades, that when I was in this country, when I wasn't traveling, uh, that list would have been enormous every week. It would have been 5 or 6, even 10 comics. That hasn't been true. That hasn't been true in the last few years. Uh, I have noticed in Marvel especially, but also even in my beloved DC comics, the home of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, uh, a decrease in quality and an increase in writers' willingness to shrilly preach at their audience, to make their books not just topical but partisan, and to imply or state outright that if you don't share the writer's individual politics, they not only don't want you to buy their comic, but they think you're a horrible person. That has come through in many, many author and artist interviews that I have read. And it's noxious. That's absolutely noxious. You don't get a more politically passionate demographic than the creators, the writers, and the artists from Marvel and DC Comics during the 1960s, and they didn't act that way, and wouldn't have been allowed to say anything like that. Their editors wouldn't have allowed them to vilify readers, just to vilify a whole segment of their readership. And that bled through, and with Marvel especially, but also a little bit with DC, that editorial attitude seemed to go hand in hand with gutting and changing the key characters in the superhero universe in both companies, to the detriment of long-standing 50-year-old comics. So I stopped really caring. I just sort of detached and moved on from all those things. Even though these comics have brought me endless amounts of pleasure over the decades, I mainly satisfied that pleasure by buying reprint volumes. The reprint culture for Marvel and DC is very, very healthy. There were a couple of reprint volumes out today that very much tempted me. They were just a little bit pricey, but uh, even remaindered hardcover and paperback reprint volumes, you can get a couple of new things every week if you're interested, and I am. And that's usually how I've maintained my interest, my involvement in the comic book world. I haven't quite been willing to just let it go completely, but I have missed over the years going to the comic shop for the latest issues. I have missed that, and right now there are two. There's nothing at Marvel, the home of Spider-Man and the X-Men and a variation of Thor. I don't recognize them at all, but nevertheless, there's nothing at Marvel that interests me at all. It's kind of amazing that the Avengers wouldn't, but I've tried a couple of issues of the Avengers in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's just junk. It's not only is it inconceivably written, but it's horribly drawn. It's just the craftsmanship. It used to be that, even I had to admit, as a DC fan, it used to be that if you wanted great comic artwork, you would go to Marvel. I hardly ever see that anymore in Marvel comics. It's really, really bad. I'm talking no backgrounds or poor backgrounds, characters or artists who don't seem to be able to draw even so simple a thing as a character climbing a flight of stairs, or anything like that. Simple stuff like that was so taken for granted 30 years ago that you didn't breathe a sigh of relief when an artist got it right. It just faded into the background. Uh, Not so much Marvel, but at DC there are two ongoing things that I am paying attention to. I'm not paying attention anymore to Superman, which is a real heartbreak. A real heartbreak. I have read Superman for a very, very long time, but I'm not interested in one guy, Brian Michael Bendis, one guy going to the powers that be at DC Comics and saying, "Look, you've got this item of your continuity that Superman has a secret identity as Clark Kent that no one knows about. Yeah, I want to change that. I want to just destroy that. I want him to reveal his secret identity to the whole world." And all of the objections that you can think of why that wouldn't be true, from practical objections involving characters in his supporting cast to ethical questions of whether or not you have the right to do this. If you, of course, don't. You're a caretaker for these concepts. You didn't create them. It's not yours to ruin them or fundamentally mar them. But I have no interest in reading Superman comics that result from the editorial board at DC Comics just knuckling under to that kind of demand, and they did. So I don't read Superman anymore. Batman is incomprehensible to me. Wonder Woman is, the last few times that I have looked at a new Wonder Woman comic in DC, uh, I have come across a character who is being written by an author who clearly thinks that a key tenet of Wonder Woman, the character, is that she hates men. That absolutely is not true. That absolutely is not true. And it just shows me that this character and her magnificent legacy have just been handed to somebody for the wrong reasons or for no reason. so I haven't been paying attention to any of the linchpin stuff that's going on in DC Comics. And there's about to be another linchpin thing, the thing that really breaks my heart. Because one of my favorite, in fact, the only character in DC Comics who doesn't have any superpowers that I love is Adam Strange, an Earth archaeologist who, by random chance, is plucked to another planet and has all sorts of exotic adventures. I absolutely loved Adam Strange in Strange Adventures. Just thought it was fantastic, and it's being revived. Adam Strange is being revived, and I have a feeling I'm going to hate it. I just have a feeling that it's going to be everything that I hate about modern comics. I will give the first issue a try. I don't think it's come out yet, but I'll give the first issue a try, and I will report and bellyache to you. But that's not it. So the two ongoing series here are actually the two archetypal DC Comics super teams, for me anyway. Most people probably say the Teen Titans or Young Justice. They probably have a more fervent fan base, but for me, it's the Justice League and the Legion of Superheroes. The Justice League being the hallmark DC superhero team. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern. Usually Hawkman or Hawkgirl, sometimes Zatanna, the Magician, sometimes Plastic Man or Green Arrow or the Martian Manhunter. It's had a vast cast over a huge amount of time. And I have been a fan enough to buy Justice League comics in virtually every incarnation that it's had. Every team, every roster, every kind of continuity. And I haven't paid attention to it recently because it seems to me that it was involved with a whole bunch of big, overarching special events that I didn't know anything about. But then a storyline started just, I think it was last week. I think this is very soon after I made my last report on this. A storyline started in which the Eradicator, a human-shaped, non-human artifact from ancient Krypton, who is a villain, and who is a warped version of his own mission, which is to preserve Kryptonian culture. But he ends up being a Superman villain because he takes that literally and doesn't care about Earth and whatnot. And in the first issue of this Justice League series, the Eradicator goes to the planet Daxam, which in this current DC continuity is populated by genetic descendants of the people of Krypton, Superman's home planet. And on the planet Daxam, they have a normal society. They are normal people. But like Kryptonians, if you take them out of their atmosphere and put them on a planet with a low gravity and a yellow sun, they become superpowered. They become Superman level superpowered. And the thing that stops them from doing that is that all Daxamites are vulnerable to lead poisoning. The ordinary trace elements of lead in the atmosphere are enough to kill them. We know all this from a Legion of Superheroes member named Largan, who comes to Earth. He comes to Smallville when Superman is a boy, and they think at first that he's from Krypton, but then when he starts to die, they realize, no, he's not from Krypton, he's from Daxam, and he's dying of lead poisoning, so we need Superboy puts him in the Phantom Zone to save his life. And in DC continuity, Mon-El stays in the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years with a bunch of crazy Kryptonian villains who can't ever age. And in 1,000 years later, in the future, the Legion of Superheroes, a team of superpowered teenagers 1,000 years in the future, one of their members, who's a super genius, comes up with a formula that can protect Mon-El from lead poisoning and that can free him from the Phantom Zone. And there you go. All of a sudden, in the 31st century, in the 30th century, the Legion of Superheroes has a member who's every bit as powerful as Superboy, but without any vulnerability to kryptonite. Now, why that same super intelligent Legion of Superheroes member couldn't come up with a serum or nanite technology or anything else to fix the warped mental states of all of those Kryptonian supervillains and free them from living as a ghost for all eternity, I don't know. But one way or another, this that concept has had many writers in DC's history from time to time wonder, well, okay, so Brainiac 5 frees Largant, who takes the name Mon-El. He frees him from his vulnerability to lead poisoning in the 30th century. Okay, but Daxam is still around in the 20th century. Krypton's gone. But there's still a whole planet full of people who become Superman level powerful if they're exposed to yellow sun radiation. What if somebody were to render those Daxamites immune? What if a cure were found early? We see a warped version of that idea in a great Legion of Superheroes story in which the villain Darkseid, I'm sure he needs no introduction to you comic book fans, actually does do that. He not only grants Daxamites the ability to leave their home planet and become superpowered without being vulnerable to lead poisoning, but he also takes control of their minds and makes them a superpowered armada that faces the Legion of Superheroes and very nearly wins, as you would expect if you're dealing with thousands and thousands and thousands of people, each one of whom is as powerful as Superman. It's the Great Darkness Saga is the name of that storyline, and it's terrific. And the storyline that started in Justice League just last week is, what if the Eradicator went to Daxam in the 20th century or the 21st century and genetically modified a whole bunch of Daxamites to serve as his army and wanted to invade and conquer Earth? Not only because that's where they would be at their most powerful, but also because that's where the last son of Krypton, the last person who stands in the Eradicator's way of making a new Krypton, Superman, lives and abides and has his being. And in that issue, the last issue that we saw, that's what happens. The Eradicator comes to Earth. The Justice League gets a brief warning. One Daxamite comes to Earth and warns them. And before they can do much more than just look around for help, the Daxamites have arrived with the Eradicator. And Batman goes off looking for help because they decide that since Daxamites aren't vulnerable to kryptonite, that maybe they're vulnerable to Superman's other pronounced weakness, which is to magic. As I said last time, I don't really understand that. And I don't understand, even if that were true, isn't everybody vulnerable to magic? And even if everybody isn't equally vulnerable to magic, why would you assume that Daxamites have that vulnerability? Why wouldn't you assume that's just Superman? One way or another, Batman goes to London to enlist the aid of a sorceress named Madame Xanadu, who may or may not help the Justice League, but she is reputed to be a very powerful sorceress. So Batman's not around when the Eradicator shows up with his advanced guard of Daxamites. The people who are around is Superman, Green Lantern, the John Stewart Green Lantern, the Flash, and Wonder Woman. 4 members of the Justice League against dozens and dozens of superpowered Daxamites. And that was the cliffhanger of last time with this story. And this is the second one. This is Justice League number 41. I chose the variant cover, which is just an Anodyne team portrait. The other cover, there are 2 covers for the Justice League this week, and the other one was about the storyline, but I like this better. I like this better, even though that green guy right in the middle there is the Martian Manhunter, who has Superman level strength, and he has speed and invisibility and the ability to shapeshift, and would be very helpful against the Daxamites. I guess maybe it wouldn't be all that helpful because he's vulnerable to fire, and all the Daxamites have heat vision. But one way or another, he's on the cover, but he's not in the issue. This is just a portfolio piece by the artist. This is written by Robert Venditti and drawn by Aaron Lopresti, and it starts exactly where the old issue left off, with those 4 members of the Justice League desperately fighting a whole swarm of superpowered villains, of superpowered beings who, when they reach full potential in a few minutes, will be as powerful as Superman. And they are basically conducting a holding exercise while Batman talks to Madame Xanadu and convinces her to help. And at the last minute, when our team has been beaten, it's as the Eradicator says, how does he put it? Earth's best defenders subdued in moments. The advanced Legion is as powerful as I calculated. So our teammates are done. They are beaten. And a part of me rebelled against that, but no, that is exactly right. That is exactly right. The Superman doesn't have superpowers if he's around all sorts of other people who have his same superpowers. Then he's just a guy. In fact, he's less powerful than Batman in a circumstance like that because he's not anywhere near the unarmed combat expert that Batman is. So things look really bad, and then Batman shows up with Madame Xanadu. And she does a sorcery spell that essentially seems to just blow everybody away for a bit. It doesn't hurt anybody. doesn't transport anybody anywhere. They're all still there. They're not incapacitated in any way. Apparently that was her intent all along, because she says, "Move swiftly, Justice League. The portal spell has limits." So apparently it was her intent all along to just whisk them away. And Wonder Woman says, "Go ahead, I'll cover your retreat." And they get away. But Wonder Woman doesn't. And she is instantly defeated by the Eradicator and all of his Daxamites. And that's the cliffhanger that this issue ends with. The Justice League is way up in the mountains of Tibet, and the few remaining members are. And Madame Xanadu appears not to have been as powerful an ally as we expected. And Wonder Woman has been defeated and is obviously either dead or a captive, a hostage for the Eradicator, who is telling everybody on Earth, he's broadcasting to everybody on Earth that they have an hour to make their peace with their gods and to get used to being under Daxamite rule, because in an hour everything's going to end. It's a very tight story. It's very well done. And once again, it had me wondering what the current state of DC continuity is like. As I've mentioned, I've dipped in and out, so I'm not 100% sure. This has been an active question the whole time that DC Comics has been around. In the Julie Schwartz era, it wouldn't have been Daxamites. It would have been Kryptonians. He would have found a way to flood the world with evil Kryptonians, or even just release a few villains from the Phantom Zone. For decades, that was an active comic book question. If 6 Kryptonians got loose from the Phantom Zone, would Earth's heroes have any chance at all? Just 6. This has dozens of people at that power level, but just 6. Back then, the number of people who could have gone toe to toe with these Kryptonians would have been entirely tiny. And now I don't even know the full extent of that. Once upon a time, there was not just the Justice League, but the Justice Society. And the Justice Society had among its members the Alan Scott Green Lantern, who was immensely powerful. It had Dr. Fate, who was immensely powerful. It had the Spectre, who was immensely powerful. Those people would have been able to do it. In another era of DC Comics, you would have had Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, and they were effectively Superman-level power. Never any real hint, never any writers were told, if you have an adventure with Mary Marvel or Captain Marvel Jr. or Captain Marvel, one of the rules that you have in writing this adventure is that nothing they do must be a strain for them to do. If you want to imperil them, imperil their secret identities, which are just ordinary mortals, but don't imperil them. Editors at DC Comics for decades used to say about Superman and Supergirl, and also the Marvel family once DC got the rights to it, editors used to tell their writers, if you have Captain Marvel Jr. swim to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to lift a submarine to the surface, I don't want to see him straining to do that. Any physical thing for him or Mary Marvel or Captain Marvel is easy to do. You're not going to put your storytelling ability on that. That is not going to be part of your story complication. So, once upon a time, that would have been true. At least would have given a little bit of delay. And Supergirl herself, I mean, she's a teenager. She's not an adult like Superman, so maybe she could handle one Daxamite, at least for a bit. Captain Marvel certainly could handle a few. And also, there should be another 2 or 3 Green Lanterns. We've got the John Stewart Green Lantern, but we don't have Hal Jordan, and we don't have Guy Gardner. The Green Lanterns, I think myself, in this issue, that a Green Lantern with a fully charged ring should have been able to hold out a little longer against these Daxamites than John Stewart does. But I have a feeling that's being done to enhance the drama. Certainly it worked on me. I'm on board for this. Can't wait for the next issue. Hope it comes out next week. This was not a whole month between issues here. And the other team book that I got this time around was the Legion of Superheroes. This is Brian Michael Bendis, the aforementioned Brian Michael Bendis, who is doing a star turn on the Legion of Superheroes. The editorial powers that be at DC Comics said, here's the Legion, do anything you want with it. Change it any way you like. We don't care. And that's what he's doing. This, again, had a normal issue cover for issue number 4, and also a sort of a portfolio special alternate cover. And I got the alternate cover because it's just fantastic. It doesn't really matter to me that my version, the version of Lightning Lad that has been around for 50 years, is not black with orange hair. It doesn't matter to me that the version of Cosmic Boy that's been around for 50 years is not, for some odd reason, Earth Oriental. It doesn't matter to me. I'm trying not to have it matter to me. I'm trying to see that those are just surface things. This was the make or break issue for me in terms of the Brian Michael Bendis Legion. because I originally started off wanting to get this thing not only to show my loyalty to the Legion of Superheroes, which is my favorite kind of comic, especially if you've got Superboy. This is not Superman when he was a boy. This is Clark Kent's son, John Kent. But even so, the idea of having the S symbol with the Legion, the idea of having someone plucked from 1,000 years in the past and having adventures alongside the Legion, if that is John Kent instead of Clark Kent, I'll take it. This has, in other words, a lot going for it. It has a lot. It's doing enough stuff to make me keep coming back. But this was going to be the make or break issue, because this is the issue where John Kent learns the origin of the Legion of Superheroes. And I knew that Brian Michael Bendis would muck around with it. And I just wondered if he would muck around with it to such an extent that I could not keep buying this. I originally wanted to buy it mainly for the artwork, but the artist is long since gone. He does a couple of panels in this issue. And Brian Michael Bendis will soon be gone. He won't stick around. I don't think any of you care, but it's my channel. So, the original origin of the Legion of Superheroes is a template. It was changed just slightly, expanded, deepened by every author that took a whack at it. But it was basically a template, which is that you have 3 teenagers. A young woman from the Saturn's moon Titan, where everybody is a telepath. She is a telepath. A young man from the planet Wynath, who has the ability to hurl lightning bolts. And a young man from the planet Brawl, whose inhabitants faced metal monsters and metal storms on their planet to such an extent that they evolved the ability to control metal. They evolved, basically, think of Magneto from the X-Men. They evolved those powers. And various forces brought those 3 kids on a trip to Earth. The character who had come to be called Saturn Girl was going to join the science police. She was going to go into a police career. The character who had come to be known as Lightning Lad was looking for his missing brother. And the character who was known as Cosmic Boy was coming to Earth because Brawl might have lots and lots of people who can manipulate metal, but it's also a poor planet. It's a resource poor, money poor planet. And he was coming to Earth to look for a job. And when they are on Earth, when they are on a shuttle to Earth, they see boarding that shuttle R.J. Brand, who is the richest man in the galaxy. And once he's on board, the Saturn Girl detects thoughts of people who are trying to either kidnap or assassinate him. She warns the 2 boys. They've all 3 just met. They don't know each other. And they spring into action to save R.J. Brand. Cosmic Boy has the ability to manipulate metals. He can pull guns right out of their hand. Lightning Lad can fry nervous systems and blast people through walls with his lightning bolts. And Saturn Girl can disorient and mentally stun people. And they do. They band together instinctively. They save R.J. Brand. And he thinks, hey, there's something to this. This could be an inspiring movement throughout the galaxy, throughout the United Federation of Planets. What if I were to give you kids some snazzy costumes and a new clubhouse, and we were to make a team called the Legion of Superheroes? And what if we were to pattern our team on the heroes of the ancient past, specifically Superboy? Well, maybe that would work, and it does. It does work, and the Legion becomes a sort of an adjunct to the United Federation of Planets and an adjunct to the science police who ordinarily would fight crime and corruption. And the Legion also decides to use time travel technology to go back 1,000 years and induct Superboy into the Legion. They invite him to become a member, along with a whole bunch of teenagers from a whole bunch of other worlds, all of whom have individual unique superpowers. That is the basic template of the origin of the Legion of Superheroes. And that's the thing I was worried about, because that's what Brian Michael Bendis goes at here. And there are quite a few changes. We can go over just a few of them. The main problem that I've had with this reboot of the Legion so far is a hideously artificial pandering to what we can knee-jerk call performative progressive left politics, SJW woke politics. That would be the only reason imaginable why you would race swap characters, is so that you have less white skin for people who will otherwise mob you on Twitter. It can't be. There isn't any other way. There isn't any other deep rationale for that. it's actually kind of insulting, and everybody has commented on that for 30 years in comics, but because DC and Marvel have both been guilty of it at one point or another, but not so systematically as now, and not so fearfully as now. You can smell the fear coming off these pages that if I don't do enough of this kind of performative stuff, I will be mobbed on social media and drummed right out of my profession, no matter how long I've been in it. Uh, and that has been my main complaint with this reboot so far. And I have to admit, it crops up a lot in this issue, more than in any other. We are told, for instance, that Saturn Girl uh, uh, contacted the United Federations of Planets once, a young United Federation. Think of it like junior diplomats. They have an event going on, and she contacts them, and she says, the United Planets Youth Delegation for Peace. That's the thing that she contacted. And she says, I put in the request in the form of an essay about how the United Planets isn't actually working, which is a hallmark of the kind of performative woke politics that we're talking about, that the way you get noticed by someone is to call them every bad thing in the world and expect that they will say, huh, yeah, I better honor you for that. That was the beginning. That was a very mild beginning, but it was pretty bad. And then we move on to Lightning Lad on Wynath, and we get more changes. And in this case, it's his sister. Now, in DC Comics, in the traditional Legion lore, his sister also has lightning powers. And in this case, that is also true, but this is clearly being done. There is a large and vocal commentariat for comics these days they go by all sorts of names. Their detractors call them toxic fans. They themselves sometimes refer to themselves as Comicsgate. We've mentioned them on this channel before. And one of the things they hate, absolutely hate in current comics, is how all men are portrayed as feeble and timid and incompetent, as a way to artificially lower the competition field in order to make any woman character seem better, fiercer, stronger, much more hashtaggy. And these people, these alt-light comic skaters, tend to exaggerate how bad that is. Of course, they exaggerate everything because they're looking for clicks. Most of them have a significant side gig in the money from their YouTube channels. But when they're right, and sometimes it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and in this case it does, because we go to Wynath and we find out that Lightning Lad is actually cowed by his sister. She is the incredibly aggressive, incredibly assertive one in the family. He's got, I don't know if you can make it out, he's got the big upward panicked eyebrows pretty much all throughout this issue. And also, if that weren't bad enough, the scene that we come across is her yelling at the science police, the cops, ICE, essentially, in protection of a band of refugees who are coming across the border. And it's just so pandering. It's just so thinly pandering. But one of the things we learn when the scene shifts back to Lightning Lad and Lightning Lass's home on Wynath, we learn a few things. One of the things we learn is that they have two mothers. Again, more pandering. And another thing we learned that surprised me is that the whole family has lightning powers. And there's a lot of them. There's not just three anymore. There used to be Lightning Lad, Lightning Lass, and Lightning Lord. Two brothers and a sister who have lightning powers. But apparently, according to this character, we were born with the power to stop it. I don't know who that we refers to. It might refer to just her and her brother. But it sounds like it refers to the whole family. But anyway, then we move on to the next origin, because we get the origins of the first three Legion members before we get anything else. And we move to Brawl. We move to a rather beautiful picture of Cosmic Boy fighting some of those metal monsters. But once again, there's been a change. There hasn't been much of a change with Saturn Girl. Excuse me. With Lightning Lad, there has been a change, which is that apparently his whole family has lightning powers. And they apparently were born that way. They didn't get them from an accident. They were born that way. And the change with Cosmic Boy is that we're told that on the planet Brawl, 1% of the population has the ability to control magnetic fields. Not everybody, just 1%. And Cosmic Boy is one of those people. That is the biggest change. Other than that, they just continue on with his story. He is a popular figure on his planet. He is in the old Legion continuity. He's popular because he's a star of Magnoball, a sport that unites the whole planet, and he's like the Michael Jordan of Magnoball. So everybody knows his name anyway. In this, it's not really clear why he's a champion. I guess maybe they televise his fights with those metal monsters. One of the obnoxious bits that Brian Michael Bendis, I'm sure, is solely responsible for here is that this page, you're not going to be able to make it out, but this page and many, many others throughout this issue have blocks of untranslated interlac. Interlac is a language for the 1,000 Years in the Future. It's a language for the Legion that was made by Paul Levitz and a whole bunch of other old-style Legion writers. And they made an alphabet for it, and they made punctuation for it and diction for it and whatnot. But it would never have occurred to them to put just blocks in there and not translate it. That is just, it's really obnoxious. It's a nervy thing to do. And this version of Cosmic Boy is coming to Earth because he's been invited. All three of these people have been invited to this Young Federation event. So their original motivations are gone. Lightning Lad is not looking for his brother. Saturn Girl is not intending to join the Science Police and is going to be redirected to the Legion. And sadly, because I really liked it, I thought it was really refreshing, Cosmic Boy is not looking for a job. They're all coming to join anyway, to join something anyway. And some of the writing here is Brian Michael Bendis trying to be clever, and it's just dumb. When these three are introducing each other, Lightning Lad, Cosmic Boy says, "I'm a champion on and Lightning Lad says, "What does that mean?" And Cosmic Boy says, "It means I'm a champion." And Lightning Lad says, "Great." Utterly inane. Just absolutely ridiculous. But they meet R.J. Brand, who is in this case not the richest man in the universe, but a woman, a female alien, who is the head of the United Federation of Planets. She's the president of the United Federation of Planets. So she's not just some interested Daddy Warbucks figure anymore. I actually kind of like that. That makes more sense. It never really made sense to me that a private financier would be allowed to create his own super army and not be stopped. And in this case, it makes more sense that the president of the United Federation of Planets would be able to authorize whatever the Legion ends up being. But she joins the shuttle that they're on, and that starts to look like a traditional Legion origin story. And sure enough, the shuttle is attacked, and there's a great panel here where our three are ready to spring into action. Minus a few details, that is absolutely classic Legion. But then the Superboy's orientation session, where he's learning all this stuff, gets interrupted. So we don't know the rest of the story. We don't know how it turned out, and I don't know if we're gonna be told. But one way or another, there were some things that I objected to. I can't stand the forced woke politics. I know that Brian Michael Bendis himself does not believe or prioritize any of that crap. Not any of it. The people who do prioritize it don't read comics. And the one thing I'm willing to say about Brian Michael Bendis is that he's probably a comic book fan. One way or another, I can't stand having it there. It's going to look so dated and so fast. But I was expecting that the fourth Legion issue would be a deal breaker for me. I was expecting that I would say, all right, well, you've done enough fundamental violence to the whole idea of the Legion that I don't want to continue. Even though there's a full-color Legion comic that's out now, I'm just not going to get it. But this issue didn't do that. There were minor irritating changes, but nothing fundamental. I will definitely read the next issue. I think I'll probably have to wait a month for the next issue of the Legion of Superheroes. I'm pretty sure that I don't have to wait that long for the next Justice League. It might come out in 2 weeks or even a week. I'll have to check online and see. But by and large, it's successful and relatively painless. A trip to the comic shop. So I am encouraged, and we'll go back next week. So I will wrap this up, and I will report back next Wednesday. Thank you, BookTube.